I'd like to welcome Betsy to the show. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to get this interview going. Give me the gist of it. What was your perfect storm like? What were the symptoms that you're dealing with?
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, like as I look back, there were things that I didn't realize were chronic pain. I had some rib pain that was kind of like started after my first kid and then went away. And then after my third and fourth kid, like it just didn't go
Yeah.
away. And then for a few years, it was low grade, but it was like a chronic rib pain. And what really brought me to this work, though, was ulcerative colitis. I was actually diagnosed at a time when, talking of perfect storm, and we'll just get, kind of personal already, is like, I was raised in Utah in a high demand religion. And so it was at a time of like a lot of stress with some conflicts with those members of the church and neighbors and having to move and leaving the church and having four
Yeah.
kids and probably going from working part-time to working full-time. So that was the first like perfect storm.
Oh,
A lot of
before we
stress.
get to the other symptoms,
Yeah.
ulcerative colitis is like the big one that's personal to me. Uh,
Yeah.
how old were you when you got it, and what were the steps into? Did you do the colonoscopy as a test? Did the doctors? How did you? And what were the symptoms of it?
Yeah. Okay, let me think. Because let's see. It was right after I had my fourth kid and right after my maternity, I went back to work full time instead of part time. And my husband at the time went to school. And so let me think how old. Anyway, kind of mid 30s, like mid 30s. And basically, um, I was just attributing it to like changes with pregnancy. And then my digestive system was not getting better. And there was blood in the stool. And there was stuff that I was like, okay, I better go get this checked out. And they basically said, we don't know why people have ulcerative colitis. It's sometimes hereditary. Usually it's like women, usually they're kind of midlife. We don't really know why. And we don't even really know what foods are good for you because it's different for every person. And so I did some research, and there were things like um, to eat like already processed types of foods so that it was easier on your digestion. So it was like white bread and rice and all these things that were so contrary. And anyway, so at that time when I was diagnosed, I basically just started taking the medicine and did pretty well
What
with
meds did you take?
it. I
What meds
can't
did
even
you?
remember. It was like I want to say it
Were the
was like
pill forms? Was it like
it was like
were
eight
they?
pills a day, the yellow
Okay.
ones.
Yep.
And mine was a mild case. And so it was I think for me, we had moved by that time and we were
Yeah.
even building a house. And so like a lot of stressors had decreased just naturally because of
Right.
life changes. And then I got on the medicine and then I adapted to the full-time work. So you know what I mean? It was kind of like the perfect
You managed
storm,
it. Yeah.
everything also resolved. Um, and so I really didn't have a lot of troubles with it for several years, other than just my digestion just wasn't good. But I
Yeah.
started just even kind of like forgetting about the pills and eating normally. And then though, I got divorced, and leading up to the
Question.
divorce, 3 years of
This
yeah,
was my next question. I know
yeah,
people are going to kill me because I keep interrupting you, but this is
yeah,
important.
no, interrupt
The
away.
alliance with what I went through. How was the relationship? Was it toxic?
I mean, it was getting toxic. And so I would say the way I could describe it the best is like when I got married, I was a different person and I hadn't really learned about self-development. And I, like I said, come from a high demand religion and just
Yeah.
got married in a not necessarily super young, but like immature way. And then as I started developing, and then he wasn't really developing or not in the same way, like it, I could say developing, and that sounds condescending, but it did become, and then alcohol became a problem with him, and so it did become very toxic, and I just wouldn't put up with it anymore. So it was a combination of like I learned about life coaching before I learned about mind body stuff, but to just like go back, my degree is in physical therapy, my master's degree, and my bachelor's is in psychology. And so I've always talked about the mind-body connection and all of my physical therapy interviews. That is what interested me, is the whole person, the mind body, psychology and physiology and kinesiology. Like I loved thinking of all of that. And so basically the marriage got worse and worse. I didn't want to get divorced, but we had 4 little kids, but also like it got to the point that it was very, very toxic. Like my family was involved because it was a safety threat. Um, so
Yeah,
that was
I like picking this out because if I have the opportunity to talk to somebody about ulcerative colitis, I want to see if I can pick up more patterns or not. Because I got
ah, yeah.
I got
Okay.
diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, and I was dealing with
Mm-hmm.
a lot of, well, all the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
goes with it,
Yeah.
insecurity, anger, constant survival, constant fighting. And then before you know it, boom, I got these gut issues and I didn't know
Yeah.
what they were. And then I was
Yeah.
diagnosed with colonoscopy that I had ulcerative colitis. So whenever I get a
Yes.
chance, I like to ask people, what was
Yes.
happening in your life at that time? Just so I can,
Yeah.
check mark.
I mean, I don't like to necessarily say narcissist in my case. I don't know. He wasn't diagnosed. And I do feel
Right.
like that term is like used so much. And I hate to be like, everyone says their ex is a narcissist, but like from the little that I have read, I'm like, that actually really does fit. So you could probably put a check mark next to that. And again, it was like there was a time in our marriage where our dynamic was that was a good dynamic. Like I didn't like to make decisions. I didn't want um
Right.
the responsibility. I wanted someone to just take care of me and do stuff for me. And you know what I mean? And so it was kind of like as I naturally grew and changed um and especially like discovered life coaching, just for myself, just listening to podcasts and starting to think differently and really starting to understand my thoughts have power and I can think different things and all this kind of stuff. Like to me that was so exciting. um but the second perfect storm was leaving that relationship, and there was just a lot of stress. I was really scared of leaving
Yeah.
and him being mad, um and
And you know what?
it's
I think you're right.
yeah.
Because I've also noticed this. It's not you don't have to necessarily be with a narcissist. It could be just, you know, you just grow apart, and the relationship it can become toxic, and that alone can affect you physically, right? Um,
Right,
because
right,
I've noticed that
exactly, that's the thing,
with me,
yeah.
I was in a different relationship, and I started getting diverticulitis in this one relationship, and then the other one was ulcerative colitis. So
Yeah.
the other
Interesting,
relationship that I
yeah.
had, she wasn't a narcissist. We were just
Uh-huh.
it was just time that that we started to grow apart, and then there was tension, and it became toxic. But
Mm-hmm.
that's another, it can just be toxic, and it seems that
Right,
the topic of relationships I've been bringing up this month, and I want to highlight how it can affect people, and it can uh, bring post-traumatic stress, and you name it, right? So I think it's really important to highlight it.
right.
Sorry, I kept interrupting you. It's just
Yeah, no,
something that
I
came up.
think, no, I was just thinking about that a lot because the holidays are coming up. And
Yeah,
so when people go home, a lot of times they can get symptoms that they haven't had since they were home. I know one of my clients, she'll always get her period no matter when she is in her cycle, every time she
yeah,
goes home for a certain event, right? So it's like, we do want to be aware of that, and also
yeah.
just to not to predict it and curse ourselves, oh, I'm going to feel so horrible. But if we do have a symptom, just to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that was a really stressful time. Part of me is really scared that's happening again, and so this makes sense that I might have a few symptoms, and that's okay. Because like especially now that I know more from the like Dr. Schubiner and the people that I follow more now, they talk about autoimmune as something totally separate. And and I get why. Like there's more research, this is the low-hanging fruit to just talk about chronic pain and
Yeah.
pretty much, there's hundreds of symptoms that are just that don't involve the disease process. But the difference is
Can I,
tissue
yeah,
get
like you
disease,
said,
right?
they have to kind of play ball because
Yeah.
they're doctors, so
Yeah, exactly.
it's already woo woo as it is. So they're
Yeah,
trying to ease it
exactly.
in.
That's
And then you start
exactly,
going,
I think,
"Thank
why.
you," and then people are like,
Yeah.
"Okay, that's just I'm not even listening. I'm not even gonna," right?
Right. If you start saying this cures everything, then it's just like, oh, okay, well, that sounds like snake oil or something. So
Right,
when we keep it
exactly.
really scientific, but the kind of cool thing is, like, during the divorce, I just naturally started feeling like going to hot yoga. I happened to meet people there, someone who was reading John Sarno's book, The Divided Mind, and said,
Nice.
ulcerative colitis is in there. So I think it's before I'd heard of anyone else. I think curable had just barely been coming out. Like, it was back in 2019, probably. So it was
Yeah.
before a lot of, like The Way Out, that book had not come out yet. So I was kind of just like, kind of going on my own, just like Sarno. Oh, he's a reference from maybe the 1970s or 80s, but still,
Yeah.
it was like it felt true to me. It resonated with me. And when I read that, I just had enough of that conviction that I needed to just be like, oh, okay, this is great, great news for me. I
Oh yeah.
wasn't that. I wasn't one of the people that was like, no, I hate this. For me, it just made sense. It was like,
Right.
obviously, super stressful times in
Oh
my life is when I get it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, it was also okay. This is interesting. I'll take that. I was just happy to be
Yeah.
like 60% healthy. I was like, I'll take that if I can eat some foods.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
you dig a little bit. You see some success stories.
Yeah.
The mind body space is starting to grow a little bit, and then you're thinking, you know what? I can fucking do this. I can fully recover. And then you do it.
Yes.
And then there's the
Yes.
evidence, right?
Yes. And for me, it made sense too, because my doctors didn't seem to know about what was going on. Like, maybe with
Yeah.
some of these diagnoses, it's different, right? They're like, this is what happens and this is what you do. Even with IBS, they tell you a diet. I just, the way that they were just describing it, and they're like, oh, you're starting to do yoga now. Oh, that helps. Okay, keep doing that. I'm like, why am I going to these appointments for you to just tell me you don't know
Yeah.
what to do? So for me, it just made so much sense in that way too, because I wasn't getting like a real clear answer from the doctors about like why this was happening to me specifically, other than maybe it's hereditary.
Right. That's the next one. They usually say it's in the genes,
Yeah,
right? It's in the blah blah blah. And then
yeah,
you like me, I buy into it, that becomes my label, and then I just
yeah.
go, okay, well, I'll just keep managing with these pills.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just take the, pills and then probably more pills. And then, eventually maybe I have to have like a surgery. And I mean, really, the
Yes.
doctor sat me down, and it was one of my first visits. And I remember crying because he was basically
Yeah.
like, um, I mean, basically what would happen is we'll take out part of your colon and you'll have this colostomy bag, and it's fine though. You can still go swimming, you can still have sex. And I was just like, I started
Yeah.
crying. I was just like, what? Because, I think I had a mild to medium case when I was diagnosed. But, you start thinking those kind of things. And then what we know now about neuroscience and the pain fear cycle, yes, you could have an organic thing, and you could add so much fear that it's just like, the petri dish of your cells is in this toxic environment. So you're creating more pain, you're creating more symptoms, you literally are creating more stress and worry. So your digestive system is worse.
I'll give you an example of what I think also. Since we're talking about ulcerative colitis, because I think this is
Yeah, this
my
is
brother,
good.
he had ulcerative colitis before me, right? And then
Oh.
so he had it 5 years before me, and I was like, well,
Mm,
whatever. And then I got it. And
mm,
then I managed it for I think it was like 6 years, whatever. And now I don't have it
mm.
anymore. It's right. It's not even I don't even call it remission. I just
Yeah,
call it went back to back into the cave where it came from.
yeah.
For my brother, he ended up going on infusions. So he had to
Wow.
take the Ramicade, and he's still on it, but
Wow.
he's not open to the mind body thing, right?
Mm,
He's
mhm,
actually the fear of him with the doctors and my mom pushing him, like, don't listen to your
mm.
brother. He's not a doctor, blah blah blah, right? It keeps them there because they also say if you come off this stuff, sometimes it might not work when you try to get on it again.
Oh my
Plus, you get
God.
approved by the pharmaceutical companies. They give you they pay for a portion of it because shit is expensive,
Oh
right? And he's like,
yeah.
well, I want to stay on this stuff because I don't want to pay for it. I can't, So then people are forced to stay on it, and
Wow.
he's managing it, right? So there's not enough fear driving him to make changes like it did
Right.
with me,
Yeah.
right? And proof is in the pudding. I tell them, look, I haven't taken medications in what, 3 years, whatever, and I'm
Yeah.
thriving. I never get sick anymore in general. Like all the symptoms that I had, don't you? I'm like, Mom, don't you remember what I went through? And then
Yeah.
they almost tell you like, I don't know if you really had ulcerative colitis. I don't really think you had it, right? And they kind of dismiss,
My God.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Oh,
just
that's
interesting
fascinating.
how my brother and me both got it. And what I think happens is
Mhm.
when you have people that have the same DNA or genes, whatever, and you stress them out, right? You like two mice.
Yes.
Let's say they're both brother and sister. You stress them out. Symptoms will manifest according to their gene pool. So let's
Yeah.
say somebody's another family stress them out, they might manifest as strokes, or this other family might be you know um heart attacks. But in our
Oh,
case, me and my brother, it was ulcerative colitis, and
yeah.
who
Yeah.
knows, it could be dementia or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
I just think that's what makes us unique. But I don't think that we're trapped, that because my uncle had blah blah blah, that I'm forced that I'm gonna get it, right? Sure,
Right.
if I get put myself in a stressful situation like him at 60 and keep that bucket full for most of
Hmm.
my life, symptoms going to manifest. I might get what he got, and sure, you'll see a pattern. But I don't think that's necessarily a prison sentence,
Right.
right?
Right. Because our brain is so much a part of it. And to take it one
Right.
step further, your sibling usually is raised in that same environment with the same thought patterns and beliefs and perspective on the world and fears about the world. Right. And so I do
And
believe,
we broke free.
yeah,
We
yeah.
broke free.
Yeah,
We broke
yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, you may have been raised in a way where, maybe it is something like high blood pressure and there's a lot of stress and cortisol in that family. Partially it's genetic and partially maybe it's their habits. They're watching the news every night or whatever it is, right? So
I agree,
there's
thousand
those
percent.
kind of things. It's nature and nurture, but that's the type of thing we can't really like separate them, but we can definitely see when you change your thoughts now, it can have a different result because now you're living a very different life than your brother.
Right.
And you could have
And
gone that same path very easily.
right, I was preparing myself to go down that same path because I saw
Right?
him go at it first, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, worst comes to worst, I could do the Remicade and I could get the surgery, or I was thinking I'll do the
Yeah.
fecal transplant, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was going to go that direction, but thank goodness I got the 70 symptoms. Something else hit me hard, that I was forced to do the mind body thing, fully
Yeah.
recover, and I didn't even have to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. I love
So
that.
it's a gift in a way, right?
Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I feel like I was relatively lucky. I mean, there were definitely times in my life where it affected me and it was embarrassing and I, had to carry a change of clothes in my car and you know what I
yeah,
mean? There's times that were bad, but like definitely I know some people went through years and years and years of this struggle. And even one of my clients right now, like she had part of her colon resected from ulcerative colitis. And then after
yeah,
that, she had no more problems with ulcerative colitis. But then she had, 5, 10, 15 other mind body symptoms until
right,
finally she found this work. And oh man, she is like one of the star students I've ever seen. She just went through all of Dr. Schubner's book, came for coaching with me every week, and she went from like wheelchair bound to walking, hiking, um,
right. You
but
can live a full
gardening,
life
all these
even if
things.
you're if
Yeah.
you're they take the colon out. I know people that had their
Yeah.
colon out, and they're healthy, right?
Yeah.
They're regulated,
Yeah.
they're healthy,
Yeah.
they're
She's
living a
doing
great
great.
life. Yeah,
18,000 steps when she goes to an amusement park with her kids. Like she's fully functioning. And all of the other things were mind body. And I don't think she has those problems with ulcerative colitis anymore because the way that my doctor phrased it at my last, um, what's it called, colonoscopy, was no more active disease. But I'm like you, I didn't have that fear of like, oh, it's just looming around the corner, it might be back.
right,
One time I even went for this consult for something and they're like, oh, because you have ulcerative colitis, you are at risk for developing Crohn's. And I almost just like laughed to myself because I was like, oh, I'm so far from believing that now,
right.
right? That I'm just gonna like, it's gonna just like
Or the big
land on
C,
me randomly,
the
right? Out of the blue.
Crohn's, and then there's a colon cancer thing, right? Of course. And
Mm,
between you and me, I think the big C is also included into that group. And I don't like to talk about it much
Yeah,
because some people go,
exactly.
"That's rude. How dare you say that? How can you?" Because I know if I start talking about cancer
Right.
or MS or Parkinson's, then people will just disregard anything else you say before that. So I try to not
Right.
talk about it. But honestly, I think the cancer, you can throw that right into the
Yeah.
batch.
I think there are case studies for sure. Uh there are examples of that. And when I found all this stuff, I found Joe Dispenza at the same time, and people feel like he's a little extreme, but also for some people, like this client of mine that I was talking about, I mean, she was bed bound. She had nothing else to lose. She was like, I don't care. She had probably like 12 different diagnoses, from stiff person syndrome, fibromyalgia, IBS, ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis, all of these things she
Right.
was diagnosed with. She was on like 13 different medications. I think she's down to like 5 now.
Right.
And
Did you ever go
yeah.
down the rabbit holes of Facebook groups and the naturopaths, stuff like that?
Not really. I mean, I definitely was like spending a lot of time at the health food store and researching and trying to go
Yeah.
down the like healing through food or herbs type of route. But
Right.
like again, I was pretty lucky. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, looking back, there were some other things. I had a throat thing for a while, where I had that problem swallowing a couple years in a row. So looking back, I can be like, oh, I had a lot of these things, but I wasn't like, as severe as a lot of people. So thank goodness for that.
Right. Yeah. For me, I think it was managing my symptoms. I only had ever, like 5 or 8, and I didn't have the fear to drive me to make any changes, right? And then eventually, when you fall hard, that fear really drives you, and then you stay on the path, right? You really want to make changes, and I think it's a
Hmm.
gift, right? So
Yeah.
so what did you do? What was the point where you're like, okay, I think I found the path, and I'm going to stick to it. What was it? How did you find it?
Yeah. Well, it was definitely like this time of change in my life. I was getting divorced in the process of it. I was living in a different house. I had these friends from yoga and was getting into all of this information that just was resonating so much. Like I was already into life coaching, and then this was more like I'd never heard of law of attraction or the secret. Like I
Right.
just discovered basically um, Sarno, Joe Dispenza, and The Secret all at the same time. So I started doing visualizations, meditating for the first time. I think I meditated for like 360 days straight or something, and then I missed one, but I just started going all in because I already knew from life coaching the power of your thoughts to create your results. So it made so much sense to me. The thoughts in my mind could affect my body as well. Right. So I did literally one of those mind movies Joe Dispenza talks about in Becoming Supernatural. And so I put some things about eating whatever foods I wanted and a healthy person, and then all the other things I wanted, great hair and like all these, great eyesight, all these things. So I was just like watching this movie every day. And um, so yeah, I was kind of at one of those points, not necessarily just because of the help, but because of everything. I was in the middle of this divorce. I was borrowing money from my parents every month. So abundance and scarcity was a huge topic for me. So it was kind of like, hey, I'm all in on all of this because,
Yeah.
I need a miracle right now.
Yeah, you got nothing else, and you know
Yeah.
what? It's amazing that you have to be in that spot
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get
You
yourself up,
do.
and you know what?
You
You're
do.
forced to look inside yourself and become spiritual. That's what made me spiritual. I thought I was spiritual before,
Yes,
but I don't think I really was.
exactly. Yeah. And with me, it's so interesting because within, I don't know, probably a year or so, did start coaching because I was already, like I said, I was already interested in coaching. And then knowing that this mind body piece was just basically like another piece to the puzzle. And I was a physical therapist for over 20 years. And so it made sense to me to like basically anytime I talked to someone and they started responding to this kind of stuff and would listen to me and were interested, I would just get so excited and I'd get energized and I could have a 2 hour conversation and leave it feeling like energized, And so I'm like, I gotta follow this. Like I'm passionate about this. I love physical therapy. Like I had no complaints. I never would have left. But when I get this excited about this topic, when all I want to do is listen to, all these podcasts were just coming out and Curable was just coming out and I was just like I just was just ravenous for the information, then I was like, this is the direction. And then I manifest a bunch of money. I was
Nice.
yeah, I was working. I'll just tell you so quickly because it's the best story. I was working at this job and I had worked there for like 16 years. And I asked them about earning more money and they're like, yeah, you could work more hours. And they gave me a breakdown and I was like, I'm already working 35 hours a week. So basically for 2 years, and they had the email saying it, I had been working 5 more hours per week than they were paying me. So they back paid me like 15 grand. And that was almost
Oh,
exactly what the coaching school was, because it was like a really intense year-long coaching school. And so I was like, well, that's my sign. So I became a coach and then I started, even mind body coaching was like pretty new then, I felt like, and it was before the Dr. Schubner's certification. So again, I was kind of like, I don't know, I got Sarno to go on and, they can buy Curable or something, but I had some really good success with a high profile client and she had me on her podcast and I just started getting all of these physician clients because she was a physician. She was a physician that had this podcast and she had me on that said the title of it was How I Cured My Chronic Pain and Acid Reflux with Betsy Jensen. So she targets just physicians in her podcast. So a lot of people were curious about that, right? Like that kind of title. But it
nice.
was true. Like she, was diagnosed with like fibromyalgia and all of this pain. And within 6 months, she'd gotten off her acid reflux medicine and didn't have chronic pain anymore. And so she was like, I've got to start talking about this on my podcast. So my coaching career just
Awesome.
took off pretty quick.
You started finding out about the mind body thing. You're doing the yoga. You started diving in head first with doing the meditation and you said visuals and the mind movie
Oh, a
stuff.
mind movie.
Uh,
I made a mind movie. Yeah.
yeah. And were you consistent with this every day? Like you mentioned, you did it like was it an hour a day? What were you doing with this stuff?
It probably wasn't an hour a day because I was still like in a pretty busy state. I was
Mhm.
working and had kids. And so I would listen to podcasts a lot when I would drive because I was driving my kids around a lot. Um, I would, um, I think my meditation, honestly, I started with like 2 minutes a day and then I worked up to like 10 or 15 minutes a day. So it was kind of like, starting pretty slow, but I was really consistent with it. And then the mind movie, once I did that, yeah, for a while. You know how things are. I think, I don't know if it's like this with you, but I think with most of us, you get into a thing that you do for a while and it's really fun. And I probably did it for like a month or I don't know how,
Okay.
I can't even say for sure, but I definitely, yeah, I was definitely into like the power of the mind, conditioning things in. I was doing
Nice.
yoga sometimes just because it brought me peace, sometimes twice a day, sometimes because it was the only place that I was like not
Yeah.
feeling like I was going to cry or something, so like at first so I think I was naturally doing some things to calm my nervous system that I didn't really know were that,
Right.
you know.
Okay. So then you started to notice that symptoms started to lift. Um, all the list of symptoms, like how was your ulcerative colitis? Was it starting to leave like IBS things,
Yeah.
pain? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would the symptoms were getting less and less and then um I kind of started experimenting with some foods that, like for me, coffee, again, because I was raised in this religion, Mormonism, you can't drink coffee. And that happened to be one of my triggers, but I also
Yeah.
really like it. So I think there's something, subliminally or psychologically there too, about it being restricted so much of my life and then being wanting it. But so I would start with like some acid reducer coffee or things like that, right? To try to introduce some foods back. And then when I would have symptoms, just trying to remind myself like, oh, that's the stress, not the coffee, not the food that I just ate. And it was pretty easy for me to notice like there were times that I would have stress and have my stomach just start to hurt. So I could pretty easily start to see those patterns that it was like, yeah, sometimes my stomach feels a certain way and it doesn't mean that I'm going to have blood in my stool. You know what I mean? Like I can have
Right.
a really bad stomach pain. Sometimes it even just means I'm hungry. Sometimes it means I'm really worried about something. So really starting to get, kind of like I heard the analogy of like a baby's cry and really instead of catastrophizing every little symptom, being like, oh, this actually when I have a hunger pang, it actually feels a lot similar to what I would attribute to, ulcerative colitis going on. Because when I had that diagnosis, I would imagine what they told me. Oh, they're ulcers. Oh, it's burning, a hole in your colon and that mucous membrane or whatever they said. I was just imagining this like when I would have that sensation, something burning and something eating away at my tissue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sometimes I would just go to the bathroom. I'm like, oh, there, it wasn't, it just didn't correlate all the time. Did you
Right.
notice things like that as you were starting
Well,
to do this?
I was dealing with a shitload of symptoms, so I was like
Oh,
in
okay.
a war
Yeah.
zone. So my
Yeah.
brain was constantly sending me
Yeah.
like mimicking things that weren't happening. Like it
Yeah.
would mimic an ulcerative colitis flare or a diverticulitis flare, anything that to get my attention that I didn't want, it would mimic
Mhm.
it, and
Yeah.
I had to come to a point where I was like, okay, well, let's make it happen. They became my friends, right? These thoughts, so
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
became indifferent, and then when I became indifferent, the alarm started to turn off, and my symptoms
Hmm.
started to lift. But it was a long
Hmm.
period of exposing myself to these scary thoughts, and then building that leverage of indifference, because of course
Hmm.
these thoughts are never supposed to be about like um, pussy willows or cats or anything like that. They're supposed to be scary. They're supposed to get your attention.
Yep.
So, and the brain will mimic the craziest shit, or it'll just create the craziest symptoms that are worse than the real thing, right? And then
Yeah.
the thoughts
It's
latch on, and
true.
then fuck
Yeah.
it tag teams you, and you're fucking looping on a thought. Did you deal with
Yeah.
any OCD looping thoughts or anxiety?
I feel like for sure I did. And it
Yeah.
just, for me, it felt like there was so much going on with the divorce and, like
Oh yeah.
he was like a really angry, angry drunk. So I don't want to get
Oh,
too much into the like, details about it because it was a very emotional time for me because it was kind of like he would say things that were just so like crushing to my core back then, right? Like he could say the same thing now, and I'm just like, oh, okay. But
yeah.
everything was so raw, everything was so tender. Even leaving was just this huge, like thing. Am I being a bad mom because I'm, you know, get, getting a divorce? They're going to be kids of a divorce, right? So it was just like everything was so I feel like I was just in such a stressed out state that I didn't really have time to like loop on the symptoms,
Right.
but I
You're
did
right.
loop on the things now. It's almost like an analogy.
Yeah.
The things now that he could text me and I would just be like, huh, okay. This is what you say when you're feeling insecure about yourself or whatever, right? So it's almost the
Yeah.
same as a pain signal that's trying to get your attention, right? The brain can create this thing, and the more you're just like, not a big deal, it has no power over you. But when I was in that state where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's saying that about me. And I was just like, oh, like I was in emotional pain, like I was, and that affected my physical pain. I'm sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned, because it, I re- I remember now that when I was fixated on like a symptom and trying to, when the brain was able to get my attention, let's say a knee pain, and I was
Hmm.
focused on the knee pain, my OCD looping thoughts went down. As soon as I came over that knee pain, I didn't give a shit about it anymore.
Hmm.
The brain was looking for new supply of alarms to get my attention, and then it would go, well, he's healing physically, because the more I heal physically, the more my mental shit skyrocketed, and then it
Hmm.
would bring up the OCD looping thoughts. But as soon as that new symptom came and I focused on it, my looping simmered down. As soon as that went away, my looping went up. It's just interesting
Hmm.
how it
Yeah.
adjusts to get your attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that with people with anxiety. Your symptom goes down, anxiety goes up. Dr. Schubner talks about it in his book where someone's like, I wish I had my back pain back because I hate
Yeah,
this feeling of anxiety. At least with the back pain, I knew what to do. I knew how
yeah.
to like manage it, but like now this feeling is coming up, right? So it can even just be one of those symptom imperatives or something that your brain does do to get your attention. In fact, I wanted to
Oh,
ask you about this because it's so fascinating, and I've heard of other people with UC having this too.
yeah.
Um, the only times that I've really had symptoms recently has been when someone has asked about it, and we've had a conversation about it like during that day. So I can think of like, well, the other time, well, I did go to a retreat actually with Peter Levine, not to name drop, but the Peter Levine. It was really cool. And he chose me for a long demo. It was like a 45-minute long thing of like healing intergenerational wounds
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff.
Nice.
And he was like, and it was like hurting my stomach. My stomach was just like hurting so bad and gurgling and blah, 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 And I kept
Yeah.
kind of like, I was holding all these pieces of yarn connected to all these different people, and I kept kind of putting it down at my stomach. And he said, your symptoms may feel a little, they may be worse after this. Like it's normal for them to be worse. And they were. And I had like more symptoms that night. But then the other time it's happened was someone who I think we were even talking about her being on my podcast or something and talking about UC or something and she asked something about like, well, what do you do when you get symptoms now? And I was like, I just don't really get those kind of symptoms anymore. And that night I had some blood in my stool.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Which,
I was just like, no big deal. And the next day I was fine. I was like, wow, interesting.
but I think it's an opportunity for you to expose yourself to it, to turn that alarm off. And I know during my journey, if somebody would talk about a certain symptom, I would feel it. My brain would
Yeah.
mimic it, and sometimes that
Hmm.
perfect storm would come back up,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I noticed going through this journey, things get worse before they get better. They get a lot worse before they get
Mhm.
better, because you're literally
Yeah.
bringing shit up. You're opening
Yeah.
doors,
You
and you
are.
open doors,
Yeah. You're ripping off that Band-Aid and
right?
taking that
You're opening,
bullet out to get to the
yeah,
core and let it
right.
heal.
You're
But
letting when you're
but
opening
it,
that door, you're opening that old program, and it's that old program is ugly. Yes, we don't like it, but the only
yeah.
way
Yeah.
to neutralize it is to face it, to erase it. So that's what I had to do a million times. That was my 9 to 5.
Yes,
So it's not.
exactly. Yes. And if we do have a new symptom, like I've heard of people getting rashes and stuff, and I actually got a rash
It,
a week ago and I like Louise Hay because I like kind of thinking of like what could my body be telling me? And the rash was like, something
yeah,
like itching to get away and inflammatory thoughts and things like that. And it did like stay for a couple days, but it really wasn't too bad. I didn't notice it much. And on the third day, I did start Googling it. I'm like, maybe I do have, scabies or something. It looks like that. And then the fourth day, it was like gone. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think it was whatever it is. Like my body's a healing machine. I don't have to like stress out about every little thing and order medicines off Amazon or go to the doctor. It was just nice just being like, my baseline now is like, okay, it's probably something emotional. If it
Yeah.
goes on too long, then I'll go to the doctor. But instead of being like first thing, like, oh my gosh, what happened?
You know,
I might have gotten that from some dust mites from when I was helping someone move. Oh my gosh, you know.
right. But it's also not a bad thing because it's a reminder of where you're at. So let's say,
Mhm,
I have
mhm.
since doing this work, I don't ever get colds, I don't get flus anymore. But if I were to get a cold next week, I wouldn't, I'd be a little bit, fuck, I had a good streak. But I wouldn't be like upset about it because I'd be like, okay, well, that's telling me something. It's talking
Yes.
to me. Tell me, hey,
Yes.
what's going on in your life? Is your bucket starting to get full again? Well, do
Right.
something. Be aware of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, an alarm that I
Yes.
don't want that goes off. It's there to serve you.
Yes, I love that. Like I think of the rumble strips on the freeway. If you start to go on those rumble strips and and then you can get back on, you don't have to go
Right,
clear off the road before you go get help, right?
right,
And you don't have to be mad when you're on the rumble strips. You're not like, oh my gosh, I was on the rumble strips 3 times today. You're like,
right,
oh, whatever, you're just like, oh, course correct. Thank goodness for those rumble strips. So I didn't
right.
fall asleep and go off the road.
We don't have to be so hard on ourselves. We could just
Yeah.
understand what's going on. The brain and the body isn't there to fight with us. It
Right.
isn't like, making fun of you or
Yes.
nothing. Appreciate it
Yeah.
for what it is and do something about it. And if you don't, you're gonna
Yes.
find out. And there's nothing wrong with finding out. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Yep. I love that. I love thinking of it that way. And I think most of the time it's safe to think that and it's right to think that. Now, if you were in an accident and your bone is poking out, like go get medical attention. But
Yeah,
for most of the things that come up for us, even new pains, I think a
yeah,
lot of the time it's just our body talking to us. And I even remember one time I was driving and I felt my muscle in my neck just tighten up. I think I was late for an appointment and I thought I was going to be late. And once I got home and got on the call, and I think the client was later than I was, actually felt that muscle relax. But
right.
like, but if you're in a constant state of stress, you're not going to notice those nuances. You have to kind of like, once you get calmed down and have that baseline, then it seems more like a communication.
Yeah. I noticed that with muscle tension, uh, like with pelvic floor pain, all that fun stuff. It was one of the
Mhm.
last things to go, and my gut stuff was one of the last things to go because it makes sense. Like if I'm freaking out about this new symptom here, right, and I have this storm up here of ruminating and trying to figure it out,
Mhm.
you're linked with your muscles directly with your brain and your gut. So it's
Yeah.
like whatever you're feeling here, this is gonna express itself, or
Yes.
your muscles are gonna go, right? So
Exactly.
I had to be okay with how much. You know what? Your muscles would probably be one of the last things to go because it's like right away they're linked, and it was.
Yeah.
Eventually, the muscles would relax on themselves depending on what the program was here. When I recovered, everything in its own time when it was ready
Yeah.
lifted. But it makes sense
Wow.
how certain things leave at the different stages, and I get it. It makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah. Yep. I do. I think so. Dr. Schubner says it's like a barometer. Your body's like a barometer of your environment and how you're reacting to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, I'm going to be on Dr. Schubner's. He's writing a book, and
Nice.
he got me for the ulcerative colitis example.
Yes.
Yeah, so that'll be
Awesome.
cool.
Okay.
I'm trying to get him
Sweet.
on my show too. He's like, if you do this thing for me for my book, I'll do an interview. I'm like, that's cool. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Heck yeah. He's awesome. I just met him in Boulder last
Nice.
month or two. Yeah, he's so
Yeah, they
cool.
had that seminar there thing that
Yeah,
yeah, I saw some slides on that. That maybe I'll go next year.
you
Looks like
should.
it's
It was really cool. It
yeah,
was
cool.
really good. They did a great job of integrating like learning as well as time to socialize and meet these people and ask them your questions and stuff. So it was really cool.
Awesome. I got one more question. If somebody were
Yeah.
to just start this mind body space, let's say it was somebody, let's say you were going to talk to yourself. You got the phone line, right? Your
Mhm.
spiritual guides were like, we're going to let you talk to your past self. What
Mhm.
advice would you give yourself starting in this journey?
Mhm. I would just give myself the advice of trust the timing that it takes. Like, trust the timing, whatever it is. Don't have a timeline. Don't expect things in a certain time, right? So that just knowing it's always getting better. This is always working out for you, but also to not stress and think things have to look a certain way or be a certain way, or you have to be over something by a certain time.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think
'Cause
that's
that
helpful.
puts pressure on us, right? When you're
Right.
like the
Yeah.
desperation, I gotta heal. I gotta, oh man, like, the desperation, and that just puts more pressure. And then the more you want
Yeah.
something to go away, the more it stays because it tells the brain, what are we trying to get rid of? We're trying to get rid of what? Danger? Let's keep
Yeah.
that alarm on. So that's perfect.
Right.
Makes sense.
And the less you're attached to a timeline, the faster it will actually happen, like ironically.
Yeah.
But but yeah, you have to be like, I don't really care how long it takes, and then it will be sooner. So
It's true.
it is, right?
Instead of waiting to live life to, until your symptoms go away, live life first fully, and then symptoms will leave as a consequence. That's
That
what I
is
had to do.
really good advice. It
Yeah,
really
because I was waiting.
is.
Maybe in a year I'll do that thing, but I'm not ready because I'm right. Then eventually I'm
Right.
like, fuck it, you have to do that thing, and then that symptom will fuck off.
Right? I love
Yep,
it. Yep. The most scientific terms too. Then the
exactly.
symptom will fuck off.
Yeah,
It's like how the brain works though.
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for highlighting some of this stuff on all sort of colitis. A lot of people are going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
Please send me, and the all your links so people can get a hold of you. Also,
Yes.
description of your symptoms so people can check it out. And
Yes.
yeah, thank you for being there.
Okay. Thanks for letting me be here. It was a great conversation. I love
Awesome.
it. So good.
Thank you.